computer. All right, so welcome everyone. Thank you for our repeat attendees for coming back. We've got you know we're very much looking forward to our array of presentations that we're going to run through the 2030 Working Group for 2021, and we're going to kick it off for the year, starting with the new DDX. We have folks from our local AIA Philly Coach chapter that have been involved in putting together the nice presentation, as well as many of them working with a little breakout group on data visualization. So we're going to run you through the new DDX, which was launched back in October of last year. We're going to do a live session, breakout room live session of this.
No, you're right. That's the way I think it should be done.
And
This
the
thing
folks
of
would just
knocking people
mute
down,
their
make them more
mics.
pretended.
And then we'll come back and we'll talk about what do you do with this data in terms of visualizing, storytelling, convincing clients, establishing goals within your practice. So if you're just joining, please put your name,
this thing started. The whole thing to me is
okay,
such
I'm
a
going to just
debacle
mute.
to begin with. I mean, it's like,
Okay. So mute everybody. So if you're just joining, please put your name, email address, and your AIA number into the chat so we can make sure that you get continuing education credits for tonight's event. And again, thank you for joining. Lauren, okay, you've got presentation up here. So this is being recorded. We have all of our prior sessions also recorded and issued through our Vimeo channel, which we will share out tonight's recorded event with all of the attendees. So with that, I will hand it over to Lauren to run us through the new 2030 Commitment DDX.
I think Jonathan's actually going to get us started, but these are the learning objectives that were included in the presentation. So Jonathan, if you want to kick it off.
Thanks, Lauren. Thanks, David. So part of the challenge we had in putting this together is we know that some of you who are attending are past users of the DDX. Some of you are new to the 2030 commitment, and some of you probably could give this presentation. So you'll bear with us as we're going to go through. I think for all of us, we're in the same place in that the DDX is very different this year than it has been in past years. And we're going to just try to go through some of the differences and some things we think that might be useful to help us going forward. So by way of background, I think it's probably worth touching down on sort of what the timeline is for where 2030 Challenge came from time-wise, how the AIA came in 2009 and developed the 2030 commitment, which was really focused on, are there things that architecture firms can do specific to link in with the targets of the 2030 Challenge. And in that time from 2009 until this year, there's been sort of a steady growth of emphasis on climate change and climate action that architects and AIA members need to take charge of. So the basis of the 2030 commitment and the 2030 challenge is this idea that if we're going to get to carbon neutrality, we need to do it incrementally. We can't dive in all at once. And so starting with the initial, when it was initially put out, it was a 50% target, which then changes every 5 years to ramp up the percentage reduction from a baseline, and it uses a standard baseline. 2020 is the beginning of a new target, and so that's just showing that we need to constantly be pushing ourselves to be doing more and more. You can go to the next. This is something that came from the AIA National Working Group, which I think is really helpful for people who are deciding to sign on to join the 2030 commitment. There are a number of myths that it takes too long, that it's too difficult. And I think it's really important because the idea behind the commitment is not that we're all of a sudden going to instantly have everyone solve the problem and that only people who can solve the problem should join, but rather the way we'll address climate change is with everyone working to get better, starting from where you are and getting better. So you can see I won't read out what these individual myths are, but you can read the myths on the slide. I think that's probably worth taking a look at. You can go to the next. This is just showing some detail about what the DDX is. And so again, many of you know what this is, but when the 2030 commitment came out, the reporting was done using Excel spreadsheets that were actually pretty sophisticated and useful, but made it difficult to coordinate information across different offices or different project teams. And so starting a number of years ago, the DDX was an online database that allows you to enter your projects from any web browser, and you can submit the information both about your firm's connection into the 2030 commitment, the sustainability action plan, and then the project and project data. There's also within this, it allows you to have different groups, administrators, users, viewers, so you can have people who can go in and audit the data, who are not necessarily going to mess up the data, and you can have other people doing different things. And one thing that we're going to show you as we look through the new framework is that the new input framework that they've come up with this year might help give some different ideas for how firms may be organizing that depending on your firm. You can go to the next, thank you. So some of the changes, the annual reporting deadline hasn't changed. It's March 31st every year. Actually, there was just a note that came out on the communication network today that, last year they had an extension of the deadline because of COVID, but this year it's back to its regular March 31st. You're supposed to report all of the projects in an active design phase during that reporting year. So we'll be reporting for projects designed during the calendar year 2020, starting March 31st. There's a new methodology that if you're doing joint venture projects, there's a way of sharing and using one project instead of double reporting. And we'll get into a little more detail of how interior projects are organized. And I think that's kind of useful to sort of keep that in mind. So this is just sort of, again, sort of a high level what the DDX is. It's cloud-based, it's confidential, it's created by AIA. Actually, the Department of Energy was involved as well. And you can compare projects of different types. And the one thing that I guess I'll say is we've had some meetings with the AIA as they were developing this over the summer and fall. And there are a lot of great things about this framework. And there's some things that they're saying are going to come up in subsequent updates to the software. So you'll see it's not perfect yet, but I think there are a lot of things that are really kind of interesting and intriguing about the tool. So, I think generally there are 3 tabs associated with the DDX. So slightly different than it used to be. The portfolio includes some information about the top performers within your firm. There's some information about your account, and then a place to manage individual projects. That allows you to both enter project data in as well as exporting dashboard data. And the project dashboard is a new feature, which is that within the project team area, it's possible to set up individual tasks and individual responsibilities for different team members. So not everyone will have to see every project. It sort of automatically filters to that depending on your permissions. You can go to the next. The second tab is the company tab, which includes company information. It includes where you've uploaded your sustainability action plan. It identifies when that sustainability action plan was last updated. And so it's sort of up front and center, which I think was a good idea to help sort of visibility about how people are doing that. And then, that's where you submit the portfolio. You can see that button circled here. It also allows, if you're in a multi-office type of situation, you can identify separate offices or studios within a single office if you've organized it that way, and individual employees and team members are listed there as well. So this is just highlighting that there's key key people. And so, different people can have different rights, as you can assign that. So you can see administrators, will have a different amount of rights than for assigning and for managing the process as it moves through. And then the next tab is the reports tab, and this one goes through the sort of the general information about your project information. This may look familiar because some of these graphs are similar to the past year's overall project charts, and you can see the itemization there: PEUI reduction, energy model, percentage modeled versus non-modeled, et cetera. There's also, you can see a new information about embodied carbon, and then if you've entered in that data, CO2 emissions intensity, which is still there. One of the things that's different is the filtering is a little bit streamlined because they've really moved the format so that it's less about what did you do in a given year, and it's more about all of the data in your portfolio and filtering it. And we'll get into that in more detail moving forward. It's also worth noting that there's a couple of different ways of entering data, and I'll just say that the full disclosure, the two that I'm familiar with are direct input and bulk upload, and there is now a new link that certain energy modeling software can link directly, so you can export the energy modeling data directly from the model into your portfolio. And I haven't yet tried that, but that's sort of an interesting new opportunity. And then when we sort of talked about it, and we could talk more in the breakout sessions, some people have had different experience with direct input versus bulk upload, and it'll be interesting to know how people's reactions have been to those. What happens with bulk upload is it uploads the core fields, and then you have to go in and enter additional information about each project. And so I'm going to just mention a couple of brief things about the process. So, this is sort of the previous process was pretty straightforward. Develop your project list, upload your project data, and submit your yearly report, and you would get a result for that year. And the streamlined version, although this graphic, I realize now that I look at it in the light of day, looks more complicated, but it's basically part of what's streamlined about it is it breaks up the input into three main categories: project info, project target setting, and then tracking. And the idea is that you enter a project and that field lives for the life of that project, from concept through the end of the design phase. And I guess I'm not sure that it will allow them, if in the future, if they change things, to be able to keep that on for post-occupancy data. But so you can see, and this is just sort of icons that we're going to get into, and Lauren's going to get into more detail about it, sort of point by point. But you can see that it allows you to enter the basic information in one place, set up the criteria that will allow you to set a target, either the baseline target or a customized target, and then to track at different levels. So the little graph at the top is a graph that's part of what they've included, that if you enter data multiple different times, it will graph your progress over the course of the project, which is interesting. And the other thing that's interesting as well is it can mean, hypothetically, and I've been thinking about this, you can break up certain groups of people may be able to enter basic project information or bulk upload basic project information who may not be as knowledgeable about targets or progress, and you can sort of break those tasks in that fashion. So I think all of that is kind of interesting. And you can see this, it's just itemized in text. The first step is basic information. Second is additional sort of information. And then that section 3 is that target setting, and 4 is additional data that gets done at each phase.
Great. Thanks, Jonathan. And I'm going to go through in a little bit more detail how to report a project in the new DDX. We talked about there are three different options now. You can direct input, bulk upload, or transfer from an energy model. We're going to focus on direct input, though I'll point out a few places where bulk upload might be useful for you. So we have on the first page, on the first tab, you have your portfolio. And so you can create a new project on this tab down near your managed projects. And that's your projects as the user. If you're working on 5 projects only and not all the projects in your office, this is going to be your dashboard, but you can create a new project from that location. Or if you're in the company tab, you also have the option to create a project from there as well. It's all going to go in the same place, I believe. And then if you are bulk uploading, the input button is going to be on your company page right here next to create projects. And then, so once you've pushed that button, once you've created a new project, it's splitting up your data entry into 3 separate sections. I think previously, many of you who are familiar with the DDX probably know that if you didn't have all of your information on day 1 when you were trying to enter your project, you had issues with saving. You had to have all of your information in the required fields, even if you weren't quite sure what your energy code was and things like that. So now they've broken it up a little bit more so that you have the ability to save between steps. You can see kind of it's grayed out at the bottom, but once you've entered all of the required information, the information with stars, you can save kind of like in between the full project reporting. So we have things like project name, project status, things that are familiar to you. It's a little bit clunky at the moment, and I'm hoping that they will streamline some of this going forward. For example, you enter your project country, you enter your project city. The project city doesn't generate the postal code or vice versa. Like if you start with your postal code, I believe that generates your climate zone, but then you still have to go in and choose your country and your city and all of that. So I'm hoping in the future they'll streamline that a little bit and you'll only really have to enter it in one place and it'll kind of automatically populate. And the last thing I wanted to note on here, and we'll go through and look at the website itself, but units was a little bit confusing to us. There's 2 selections, IP and can't remember what the other one, SS, SI, something like that. IP is going to be inches and pounds. So that's probably what most of your project reporting is going to be, but you have the option to select. And so previously in the DDX, you were very much aware as you were entering data about residential, non-residential versus lighting power density. If you're not familiar, they're tracking information by different units of measure. Residential and non-residential projects are whole building projects where you have some sort of control over like your HVAC system, the building envelope, building orientation, things like that. That's going to be a residential and non-residential project, and you're going to be measuring your energy use intensity. Whereas for an interiors only project, where you really only have control of things like lighting, you're going to be focusing on lighting power density. So those are kind of change your units of a project entry. In the new DDX, it's a little bit more one-for-one. They do a better job of kind of showing you kind of the same graphics to represent both, but making it clear that the units are different. So we'll take a look at that. So this is step 2. After you've saved on step 1, you can enter information on step 2, and that's going to ask you for some required entries for things like estimated occupancy year. That may change. You can always edit that later, but if you have kind of like a ballpark idea of when that might be, just pick a date. Energy code used is very important. That's going to help set your baseline. And then you have the option to enter things like estimated building costs, estimated site work costs. If that's important to you and to your firm to track that, definitely enter it, but it's not required to save. It's not required to report. And then another thing that's very important in determining your EUI is going to be entering the use type and the area of the project. And we also found this a little bit confusing. It took us a minute when we were looking through this to find how you enter that information. There's this little plus sign on the side. So when you select that, it's going to bring up the drop downs for all of the different project types. And there are, I can't even remember how many, I want to say like 20 or 30 different project type options. There's multifamily housing, single family housing, multifamily townhouse. There are a whole bunch of different options in there. And then you're going to type in the square footage for the project. And once you enter that information, you've got your energy code and everything in. It's going to spit out a baseline number and then a 2030 target number. And that's going back to what Jonathan was saying about we're past the 2020 threshold now. So our reduction goal, our 2030 target, is going to be 80% reduction from the baseline, which is an older code that we'll note a little bit later. So that's 80% reduction is what the goal is going to be for the 2030 target. You may choose now, you have some new options to set your own custom baseline. You may have heard Jonathan say that. If for some reason you've kind of set your own baselines for certain projects or certain studios within your firm, you can adjust that baseline. I think we would recommend that you try to hold that prescriptive 2030 target baseline at a minimum, just so that you can keep an eye on where we're trying to go to get to net zero. But if it's important for you to track a different baseline, you have that option now. And so going into, once you have saved, going into step 3, when you save step 2, going into step 3, this is where you can define that custom baseline. And it's giving you, now you have the ability to review some data here. There's a box and whiskers chart that is showing you all projects in the DDX, or I think it's all active projects in the DDX, and it's showing you kind of the range of EUI numbers for those projects. So you can see the 2030 target is over here. And then based on the selections you've made about energy code and about project type, gross square footage, it's giving you other similar projects. And then you can filter a little bit using these filters up here if you want to change it to be a little bit more specific. And then you'll get a better understanding of how you're doing compared to other firms, other peer firms, other people doing similar projects to you. So that can also help you set, so for example, for this project, you see that the box and whiskers is way off of that 2030 target. So maybe we're going to try to get there, but we're going to understand that realistically, we might be more down in this range. So if we can set our goal to be, you know, kind of on the high end of that average, that might be success for us on this project. And then on the interiors only project, this is what I was talking about. They're very similar. This is showing you your lighting power density, and then the percentage reductions are a little bit different for the lighting power density because it is a different unit of measure. So the standard reduction at the moment is 25% savings from baseline. So that's just showing you where you're at. And then if you want to set a custom target, you can do that. And so this is, it seems like everyone on the lighting power density side tends to be well overshooting the 2030 goals, but you can take a look at that. And so that might help you set an even higher goal that you say like, okay, that's the 2030 target, but I really want to be at the very top. I want to push this bar even farther and see if you can get there. And then, so once you've saved all of those 3 phases, you can go back and review the information on the project page. And so this is also a little bit different, a little bit more graphically interesting. You can check in on your project status at the top, and these are actually live buttons. So you can select any of these that aren't grayed out. So if your project goes on hold, you need to just pop in, click the on hold button, and that's going to pull that project to the on hold section. You should have the option, I can't remember what that one is. We'll look at it closer on the website. They've also added a chart here so that you can take a look at how your project compares to other projects in your firm and then other similar active projects in the DDX. So you can see that this project is performing above both the firm and the national average. This chart here, this isn't a really great example. Jonathan had a better chart, but this is where you can now track your progress across project phases. So if you do a concept model, you enter your energy modeling EUI information, it's going to put a dot on this chart. And then say you go back in SD and you revise the model, you've rotated the building 20 degrees and your EUI has changed. You can track each one of those design phases on this chart, and that will give you an idea. Hopefully you're making progress towards that ultimate goal. And then over here, you're seeing your percent reduction from baseline, and you can take a look at whether you can usually tell if your project is reported with an energy model or whether it's reported just with the code minimum, because you'll usually end up in like the 30s and 40s if you're in the code, versus if you energy model, it tends to be a little bit more efficient. And then, so once you've entered that, they've changed the way that you can enter some of that additional information. It's not gone. It's just included in the design data tab, which I also found a little bit hidden. So I wanted to point that out. So on your project page, when you scroll down, this is below the charts, you scroll down a little bit farther, there's Add Design Data tab. So when you click on that, it's going to take you to this page that has a whole bunch of information kind of hidden in it. So you're going to toggle, taking a look at these. The first one is, so here's where you select the project phase. So if you're in concept design, if you need to change that, you can pick the date and you can pick the design phase. And so you can edit this information multiple times, creating that new update on your project phase. So if you select the yes button, if you click this, it's going to add a whole bunch more drop-down information that you can enter, including track changes, or it's going to ask you for the energy modeling tool, the energy modeling party, whether it's architect, engineer, whoever, and then your PEUI. There's some additional information in there, but in order to save this, these are the things that you have to enter once you click that box. If you're not ready to enter it, you can go back to the no button and keep moving. There's a renewable energy sources if you want to track your PVs and things like that. Just click the yes button and you can enter this information. We now have some more specific embodied carbon inputs available. So that gets into a little bit more detail on embodied carbon. And then there's also an additional inputs tab, which to me looks like they're thinking about additional data that's important to people right now. It just has window to wall ratio and Appendix G baseline energy model. And so we can go into a little bit more information on the website itself, but hopefully that gives you a little bit of an overview. We have some resources that we've included in here that we can share around, but if you have specific questions, the 2030 commitment at AIA.org has been really helpful for me personally. They're great at kind of answering the questions that you can't find the answers to anywhere else. So I will pass it on to Buddy now to talk a little bit more about data visualization and some of the charts you see in that reports tab.
All right, thanks, Lauren. So this is kind of taking your data further outside of the DDX. So how you can make your reporting data work for you in setting and achieving goals, whether it be through snapshots like defining benchmarks or a deeper dive to achieve project-specific and firm-wide goals. We'll also look at how to export and tools for different types of data and how to visually present the data. And then before we get into a live demo, we'll talk about how you're going to communicate your findings of this data. So next slide. So like Lauren and Jonathan went over, the new DDX can give you pretty good snapshots in defining your benchmarks. So to evaluate where to improve on PEUI reduction, you first need to know where you stand. The new charts in the revised DDX, including the box and whisker distribution, provide high-level snapshots of your reporting data that include information on national code and company targets to assist you in setting reduction benchmarks. And then some of these charts that are automatically generated, it provide further information, including extended energy use estimates, design phase tracking, and then your own unique targets for 2030 benchmarking. Next. In terms of taking that a step further, what we're calling deep dives to help you achieve further goals, like net zero and the likes, is to be able to export the data that you're reporting. So it's hard to notice and track patterns in the data itself. And so we use visualization in multiple ways to yield specific types of results that you wouldn't have been able to see before. By converting and translating the data into charts, we allow for an easier understanding of how different factors and variables can fit together in relationships, comparisons, distributions, and compositions. Oftentimes, choosing the format of a chart stems from the type of question that you're trying to answer or a pattern you're trying to tease out. So, like this image on the right from Andrew Abella, it's kind of a handy guide of starting of where you would like, what you would like to show, and then choosing a chart based on the question that you're asking, or the end goal or end pattern that you're trying to tease out. These results and conclusions can be more easily seen by looking at your recorded data in these kind of typological graphical forms. And then with these clear answers and patterns, next steps and actions for improved performance can be better articulated and achieved. Next slide. So in terms of the DDX specifically for the data that you're reporting, the targets setting the benchmarks and targets then allows you to take it further to set goals that are project specific or company wide. When you export the data, the deeper questions can be developed to pinpoint relationships and identify design action to derive your practice forward. In exporting your data, you also gain the benefit of personalized graphic representation, the layering of your own benchmarks and other data sources, tracking year to year and other progress for marketing efforts, investigating relationships between energy modeling and PEUI reduction, and then drilling down your data by the filters that you want to set. So this could be use type, climate zone, renovation versus new construction, window to the wall ratio, if you're using a sustainable rating system, et cetera. Next slide. So as Lauren already showed this screenshot under the company tab. So this is for exporting your data, and compared to the old DDX, this export of data is a much smaller set of variables. So the CSV that's outputted is a bit more manageable to deal with. For this export all button, it's on the company tab at the top and not under the portfolio tab. Otherwise, it'll only export the projects in your profile and not all the firm-wide projects. And then a further note is that some data when you export may be missing, so you might have to clean it up or go through manually, and since you know your projects, be able to fill out certain data points. Furthermore, we'll go into a little comparison of some third-party programs that you can use for data visualization, being Excel, Illustrator, Power BI, Tableau, and then specific coding languages. And with these programs and platforms, they work best with each of their own different types of data, and they also provide you with different power in terms of how you visually present your data. So there's a wide range of functionality and skills and skill level You're probably most familiar with Excel spreadsheet program that you can open the export from the DDX, the data that exported from the DDX directly, and start with their pre-made templates. In terms of Power BI and Tableau, they're very much more powerful than Excel, and they also come with online communities as well as tutorials and guided instruction. So although the skills and training are a little bit higher than Excel, you're getting a much more powerful output with the conclusions you're able to draw from your data. I included Illustrator on here as well. It's more for presentation, but it probably has the quickest and most wide range of customization of your data visualization. And then finally, there's several coding languages, Java, Python, that are the most powerful and most customizable, but require the most effort upfront in terms of learning how to actually work with the languages, because they don't automatically come with a user interface and support company program. Okay, next slide. For internal reporting, using data visualization and taking your data from the DDX a step further is very important for knowledge sharing within your projects teams, and being able to show which projects are achieving the commitment and how they're achieving the commitment. It can also produce some friendly competition for higher goals within your studio. There's this example from DLR Group showing their projects across the office and how they are meeting the benchmark or not. At the larger scale of the whole office, the data can be folded into your larger sustainability performance reports, or they can also support actionable goals through metrics in your firm-wide visions. Next slide. And then in terms of external communication, there's two examples here from SMMA and EHDD with just from their website with blog posts, being able to update their followers and showing their commitment to the 2030, not just to the AIA, but to their clients and people who follow them. So this can take form of, like, example, the company website or on social media. You can also use this data visualization and analysis in RFQs, RFPs, and proposals, so that you're able to tie data viz and actionable goals to your workflow and design process to set you apart from other firms competing. Finally, you can fold it into your sustainability action plan, whether you publicize that out to the public or as part of your signatory requirements. And the next slide. And then finally, this is a couple resources from AIA National with their help desk, which is kind of like a frequently asked questions. And then every year they release the AIA 2030 commitment by the numbers, which also provides a lot of helpful graphs and charts that you can also emulate for your own practice in terms of to get some inspiration from what questions to ask to drive your practice forward for the commitment. And then finally, for the graphic inspiration, a couple websites that are very helpful to get you started with some pretty powerful and beautiful graphics. The DataViz project has functionality where you can sort and filter by what you want your chart to do or what you want your chart to convey, and then it'll give you examples of specific types of charts that can help you achieve that, so that you can use it as a template to put your data into. And then Project Stacio is building performance related, and they provide specific example questions, and then how for example firms or students are using data to answer those questions. And then finally is a book from Edward Tufte that is, he's well known for his work and research in quantitative information. And if you prefer hard copy resources, I would recommend any of his books. So that's it.
Okay. I think I can run through the DDX website really quick. Just switch tabs. Okay. So this is the new DDX. We have the portfolio tab, which shows your top performers over here. So that's pulling from your active projects, I believe, and showing you where the highest reduction, PEUI reduction. I've got account information, and then this is where you're managing your project. So this is your personal projects. If you're managing your firm's portfolio, you probably don't really need to see this very often. Or maybe this is your way of keeping track of what projects you're supposed to be entering versus other people. But if you're looking for, I think Buddy mentioned, if you're trying to export data and you export from this button, you're only going to get the projects that are tagged to you. So I think I panicked the first time I did this because I exported and I only got like 10 projects and I was like, oh no, where'd all my data go? If that happens to you, just take a look at where you're exporting from. So here you can create the project here, or you can go into your company tab. This is all of your contact information, your signatory letter, and your sustainability action plan. If you need to edit that, that's in here. And then it's going to say manage projects as well when you're under company. This is where all of your projects are going to live for the your entire firm across all years that you have been reporting. So that information is still in here. It's just most of the data, the charts and stuff like that is pulling from active projects. So that's project statuses that are listed as active. You can also manage your columns here. You have a bunch of different options. It just gets a little bit out of control if you try to turn all of them on at once. But if you are trying to sort by studio name, your office studio name, or projects in Pennsylvania, you can turn these on and use those to sort if that's helpful. You also have the search tab, which is great. Another thing I will note on the same, I'm kind of like drilling this home, but if you try to search for a project here and you're on your portfolio page, you might not find a project. You might panic and think, where did all my projects go? Check your company tab, check that you're searching in your company tab. Let's see what else. So this is the other location where you can create a project. We'll go into that in a second. If you need to add an office or a studio, that's here. If you need to add an employee or manage their controls, you have that option here to add an employee. You can delete employees and keep track of them here. And then your reports page is at the top. And this is, you're going to want to, especially if you've been reporting for a long time. Our firm's been reporting for a couple years now. So this data looks really skewed. So you want to make sure you go and you change your reporting dates so that you get the range of data you want to see. So this is pulling active projects from the time range that you set here. And then if you are managing projects between different offices, you can sort by those office locations. We are hoping that the AIA is going to be adding a few more filters in here so that you can customize this data a little bit more. So keep an eye out for that. And then I will jump into adding a project really quick so you can see some of that. And then we'll jump into breakout rooms and talk a little bit more in depth. So creating a project. This is that step one. I'm going to call this. So you have to enter the information into items with stars next to them. So test 2, because I think I already have one that's a test. Active, you have the option to select active, on hold, complete. It's probably active if you're entering it. Test 2, your project firm number. If you track your projects with letters, numbers, enter that information here. It used to auto-generate a number for you, but I think that got kind of annoying when people didn't realize why their project numbers were letters and numbers. Project type, residential, non-residential, construction type, new construction versus renovation. You can pick the studio name. This is where I was saying, if the zip code were an option to auto-generate, you wouldn't have to do this part. United States, and then that's going to give you a postal code. 3. Project city. It doesn't auto-generate the city, so you will have to type that in. It doesn't auto-generate the state, so you will have to select that as well. But it does auto-generate your climate zone based on that zip code information. And then this is that last section, IP or SI, inches, pounds is going to get you inches, pounds. And then you see, once I've entered that last required bit of data, the button turns green, so I can save. So if that's all of the information I have at the moment, I can enter that and walk away. If you are ready to move on to the next step, estimated occupancy year, pick something that's over 20. So it's going to let you pick dates in the past. So just keep an eye on that. You're going to have to scroll a little bit. Energy code. You have all of your energy code options in here. You can enter all of this information if you'd like, but it's optional. And then this is where you're going to add your use type. Check in there. So it's added a line, but you have to enter all of this information. So you have to select from this drop-down list what you want to do. And then you enter your area. And that's going to give you your baseline and your 2030 target. So your baseline compared to the baseline code that the DDX reviews, and then 80% reduction because this is 2020 and beyond. So that is your 2030 target. But when you come down here, if you want to look at that custom baseline, you have that option to do that here, or you can look at it on the next page. So once you've entered that last piece of information, the use type, you can save and continue. And a reminder, if you have multiple use types in the same building, you can still break that out. You just keep adding tabs to that, and then you can subtract them. So save that. And then this is where you have the option to set your goals. You can either check the button to use default target, which is that 80% reduction from baseline, or you can set a unique custom target. So I'm going to look at my box and whiskers down here. I'm going to look for, so this is using my current project use type. If I, for some reason, wanted to compare to a different use type, I can select that. But if I want to say I actually want to compare just to my climate zone, you can do that. And then it's going to change your box and whiskers a little bit. So I can see that even though my 80% reduction is where I want to be, that's where we're all trying to get to. I can see that other similar projects of my type and size are only hitting about 50%. So I might decide that because of that, I want to just make it realistic and say that I want to try to at least get to 50. And so you can set that up here. You can say custom target, and you can say, oh, I think you have to pick the, so you have to figure out what that is, which would be, I think it's actually about 50. So yeah, you're at about 53% reduction from baseline. And then you can save and continue, and that's gonna push you onto your project page. That's where you're gonna be able to compare. You're gonna see these charts. You're gonna see your project towards goal. But you're gonna see some things are empty here. So you can go to the track data tab, and that's going to push you into this design data dashboard. And that's where, when you get into here, you can decide which design phase you're in. I think it defaults to the current date as your reporting date. And then as you start toggling through these, you'll see more information pops up. So you can select energy tool, who's doing the energy modeling. If you want to track the cost, you can do that here, but it's not required. And then you can add your PEUI that you got from your model. You can go through all of this. Do you have an energy demand source? Renewable energy, when you go through that, you get these options: PV, solar thermal, wind turbine, offsite. Adding these gives you just some more data to track for your projects, especially if you're doing what Buddy was talking about and exporting this data and creating charts to compare. The more data you have, the more you're able to review your progress and figure out what's successful and what's not successful. lighting power density, all these different things, embodied carbon. Embodied carbon has a lot of different inputs. So that's something to look into if you've started reviewing your embodied carbon. And then the additional inputs, window to wall ratio and ASHRAE 90.1 baseline. So you have the option when you're in here to, once you've entered, it's not giving me the option to save this because I have not entered all the information above that's required. But I can go back from here. The one thing I would note is, like it says, you can save between phases, but if you use this back button, it starts to lose information that you've already entered. So if you're on section 1, you go to section 2, you start entering information, and then you try to go back using the back button, it's probably going to clear your information from section 2. So just keep an eye on that. Test that out before you spend a lot of time entering data and then end up losing it. And I think that's probably enough for us to jump into breakout rooms for a little bit. Kind of getting tight on time.
While we're getting into breakout rooms, I'll just add one more thing that similar to the sort of simple abstract graphics that made it hard to remember to just click on that plus button. Editing data that you've already tracked is also similarly very, very subtle. So, you know, one of the reasons you might go back is if you don't know how to redo things, but it's probably better to fill out and save, and you can always go back and edit any of those previous using the very subtle pencil diagram.
Yeah, that's a good point, Jonathan. I was having some issues today looking at old projects and finding that my EUI data that I had originally entered last year was now hidden because I didn't toggle on the like yes, no button. So keep an eye out for that as well. And yeah, try to use the edit pencil more than the back button when you can.
So I think the idea with the breakout groups, once it's not that simple to break everyone out, but the idea with the breakout groups is we're just going to divide up into different groups, and then each of the groups will have someone sort of doing what Lauren just did. And if you have questions, you should ask them and help, figure out. We can sort of puzzle through what the different issues are on the DDX now, and then we'll come back afterwards to talk a little bit more about the data viz discussion, if that makes sense.
All right, so I've got everybody signed. We've got about, I think if we do 20 minutes, and then we'll come back.
Thanks, David.
All right, I'm gonna open it up now, and it'll push everybody into the rooms. Okay. Share my screen. Let's bring this over. All right, you gotta get down. All right, so everybody should feel free to unmute themselves. I'm just gonna run through and do a live demonstration here. Well, let me maybe open it up first. Is there any specific questions that folks have from what you saw in the live demonstration and the presentation? otherwise we'll just sort of dive into doing an entry in here. So I'm in our specific firm reporting. So for us, we have, you know, multiple offices. So when I come into here, is everybody seeing my screen? Okay, good. So for us, we have multiple offices around the US. So we got all those inputted into here under the company. We haven't uploaded our sustainable action plan yet, but you can see all of the firm employees that we have in here. Again, you know, the status that we give to them is either as an administrator or as an employee. Myself as an administrator, I can come in here and I can add more employees. The employees themselves can come in here and start inputting projects to the DDX. And then let's see, up here in the upper half, second piece of this, managed projects, again, is all the projects that we currently have uploaded into here. This is actually our first reporting year as a company. So we have a lot more to do between now and end of March to get this into here. One of the things I was just noticing, you know, so if you have multiple offices and you're wanting to sort of filter all your projects, they are limiting the number of items here in this managed projects. Like I came in here and I tried to add an office piece to this, and it said you can only have 4 items. Error, you can only select up to 4 columns to display. So just keep that in mind with this. What are the, you know, 4 items that you want to sort your data based upon? And again, I'm in the company portion of this, which allows me to see the company's full portfolio. I can then from here export all out of this. And again, it's going to give me all design phases, different ways of sort of filtering, but I think the default that we have here, all design phases and our units, which is inch and pounds, is fine. And it's going to export this as basically an Excel file that you could then leverage that data in a variety of ways. So yeah. So why don't we go over here into the portfolio? So you don't see much. I've just been in here testing how the new entry for the DDX works. So I don't have my own little array in the portfolio here, other than a test to this. But so within the portfolio for your own projects, we come down here and go to create a project. And again, as Lauren and all was explaining, all the items here that has an asterisk is required information. So I'm just gonna, you know, this will be my test 02. Project status. So you can set your project status here. It's a required item, but once you have your project in here, you can then also toggle its status, whether it's active or not. So as an active project, your firm project numbers. So this is where, you know, whatever my billing number would be for a project, I would then, you know, input that into this, or you can have your, you know, you can establish what you want that, you know, number to be. I've found that it's helpful if it sort of aligns with your billing numbers for a project or your filing numbers for those. And then again, what your project type is. And when we get to the next panel, the project type is going to determine what options you have available to you in terms of your data input for this. So again, residential and non-residential or commercial. For those, you are going to be inputting your predicted EUI, your KBTU per square foot per year. So these projects, you know, are for the building in its totality. whereas an interiors only is only evaluating the project based upon its lighting power density, assuming that if you're doing an interior fit out, then you have less control over the systems and the envelope for those projects. So I'll do an interiors only since we didn't go through that in the live demonstration previously. So for an interiors only, and in our office, we have quite a few of those, and I've had questions come up for that as well, as to, what do you use for the construction type, because you've got new construction or major renovation of an existing building. And I think of those really when I'm talking about residential and non-residential projects. But for an interiors only, uh, these are all sort of self-determined as to how you want to input it, as long as I think you're consistent with how you input your data as an office. AIA doesn't, dictate to you how you go about doing this. I think of an interiors really as a major renovation of an existing building, existing envelope and systems that you're inputting within. So that's what I would typically choose for an interiors only as a major renovation. And then for us, what's our studio that we're operating within, country. So got to scroll all the way down to the bottom to get to where US is listed, United States, project location, postal code. So we'll do 19106 for Philadelphia. Again, it would be great if it would autofill in the city as part of this. Hopefully that eventually happens with the DDX, because again, as you see, once you input your postal code, your climate zone auto-populates within this. So we're in 4A mixed humid climate, project state, Pennsylvania. So it'd be nice if they would have, once you input your postal code, all of these three categories of information just auto populated into it, but it doesn't do that. Inch and pounds is our unit. And again, once you input all of the required components to this, you see that it's now allowing me to save this information. And the second piece of this is about inputting your project information or establishing your goals for the project. So year of occupancy for this project, let's just say we're reporting for this year, but the project won't actually be occupied until 2022 in Philadelphia. We are under ASHRAE 2016, most current version of ASHRAE available. There are other pieces of information we could input into this. Again, if it doesn't have an asterisk next to it, it's not required. So if you knew how many occupants you had to the building, what the estimated building costs are, or the site cost, you could input those things as additional tracking metrics for your project, which can be helpful for you as a firm, as you're just from day one trying to establish your baselines of how you're doing for the building. But you see here, it's not giving me a baseline yet. Again, to get a baseline for this project, I got to come down here and input my use type. So we're going to click on the plus here to add a use type. If it was a mixed use building, again, we would add multiple uses to this. I'm going to say that this is an office building greater than 100,000 square feet. And now once I've inputted a use type and a square footage to the building, you see that it now has given me a baseline. Now this baseline for lighting, and this is lighting power density for interiors only. That baseline, just like for a whole building, if you're doing a PEUI, that baseline is going to change based upon the occupancy type, as one would expect. An office versus, say, a restaurant is going to have a different energy use intensity to the types of fixtures and the amount of illumination that you're wanting to have within that space. So here I changed it to a retail store. and you see that the baseline here has increased from 1 watt per square foot to 1.5 watts per square foot. So as you look at, your project, especially if it's mixed use, trying to get the most appropriate use type into this is important for establishing those baselines. And again, we didn't really say it so much in the presentation, but these targets are goals, but this is really about sort of establishing how you're doing and striving towards those goals. One should not feel like you have failed if you haven't hit the targets. These are just, setting a bar for ourselves as to what we're trying to strive towards, and really understand how we're doing as a practice and how we can improve upon how we're doing as a firm. I will say for lighting power density, these are based upon ASHRAE 90.1 2007. So basically, was a code compliant lighting plan with using that code from 2007. There's been a lot of evolution of technology relative to lighting since 2007, LEDs in particular. So I have found that, achieving the reductions on lighting power density is not difficult. In fact, there are many peer firms out there that, once they've gone through their reporting on these things in year one, they are continuing to increase their target goals for lighting power density. So with that said, establishing a baseline on ASHRAE 90.1 2007. It's a standard across the board, 25% reduction over that. That is what it's using for lighting power density. So if I come in here and click continue, save for that. And now I'm going to establish my target. I'm going to use the default for now, but this is where I could say, well, I actually want to have a custom. And I want to say that my target here, I think that I could do 0.65 watts per square foot. And for some reason, it's not letting me, maybe because there we go, 0.165. Now it's letting me do that. So I'll confirm that is my target that I want to have for this under, filtering by my current use type, which is a large office, all climate zones. For an interior fit out, I wouldn't anticipate that you're going to see a huge change in lighting power density based upon your climate zone. But what it will do, at least for this, is it changes the sample data that is pulling from. So you see here in this box and whiskers diagram, now that I've filtered by all office interior only projects for climate zone 4A, the sort of targets that we have in here for this is that let's see, it's a sample size of 1,500 projects with, a minimum lighting power density of 18 and a maximum of 50. So all of this is, well, your target reduction is 25 here. So you have some projects in this database that is only getting you an 18% reduction over the baseline. But, as you can see, the majority of projects are actually doing much better than that. We don't know, what's the, data timeline for these things, because this is probably data going all the way back to 2009 up to current entries for the DDX, but we don't necessarily know that. We can't really filter this by, date of projects. Is really just, I assume that is all projects that's been entered into this to date. But if I then unfilter by a specific climate zone and look at, again, all the data that's in there, now I've got 6,500 projects that it's sampling from. The sort of low end is a 20% reduction, and the maximum upper quartile was a 53% reduction over the baseline. So that's, you know, how we can begin to sort of understand how our performance for this project compares to our peers, as opposed to comparing that back to our own internal tracking for other projects. So I saved that target information, but now it's saying, well, it doesn't know yet how we're doing. A little warning here of tracking the progress, and the fact that we don't see anything in our progress towards the goal means that we haven't told it how we are doing for our project. We've established the goal, but we haven't input the actual data for this project. So we could come in here and click on track data and begin to input that information here on this page. So let's just say we're in design development, we're reporting today, or let me just dial this back and say I'm reporting this information from December of last year. And in fact, for this project, let's just say that once we ran through and did our calculations for this, that we are actually hitting 0.55 watts per square foot for this. Again, there's additional inputs that you can have for this, even though this is an interiors only. You know, you can say, well, we're doing some things with regards to renewables. Maybe we bought with the client offsite renewable credits for these things. So you can come in here and input, you know, additional metrics to this that are, you know, perhaps important to your project. For an interior fit out, you know, perhaps you're doing a whole thing around your embodied carbon of material choices, material selections for the project. So we could come in here and start to input some of the information around our embodied carbon selections for this, and what tools might we be utilizing to determine that. So even though it's not the full building envelope and systems, we still have additional inputs that we can do with these. Window to wall ratios, we're not really going to have much control over that, and a baseline energy model for lead purposes. So I'll just save that. So now it shows, well, here's my, so we do a lot of interior fit out. So here's how all the projects currently inputted to our office as a firm are performing. So interior fit outs are, and maybe this is the only interior one that we've inputted so far because it's exactly the same as what I just put in. So this is how you compare to similar projects out of the full DDX portfolio of interiors for offices, how you're performing relative to projects within your firm, and then how this specific project is performing. The other thing that you're getting now in the DDX is, you know, you can input sort of multiple milestones for the project within the year. So you don't have to just wait to the end of the year to report. You can, you know, sort of hit milestones along the way of design progress, and you can then see, you know, if I am doing this, you know, at like multiple points throughout the year, how the project is progressing towards meeting that goal. It was like in about 30 seconds, we're going to be kicked back over into the main space. So again, I can, you know, toggle the status of the project. I can put it on, if this project's now on hold or canceled. Once I'm ready with all of my projects and I want to submit that to the DDX on March 31st, I come in here under company and, you know, submit the entire portfolio. I will not check on that because we're not quite ready to do that as an office, but that is where you would come to submit your projects once you're ready to do that. Oh, muted all of us. All right. Well, welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a good live interaction session walking through the new DDX. So, Lauren, and do we have Jonathan? Yeah, there's Jonathan. Sorry, it like reorganizes all the tiles.
Everyone got to move around.
So, does folks have any general questions about the new interface for the DDX? I mean, for those that have done this in the past, this iteration of it was focused on helping streamline the input process and sort of jettison some of the input info that wasn't being fully utilized, but mostly is about trying to streamline the input process, allow for more collaboration in inputting that information. Any questions about the new platform? Or Tate, any other sort of insights on what the thought process was going into this, because you're engaged with Coat National?
Yeah, so I'm really excited about it, and I think wanted to just emphasize that if you guys find bugs or things that you like and are not finding, definitely message the board, the Basecamp board, and we will be picking these things up as we work through the bugs through this next year of development. So there was a great team that put this together, and I think for me, it does all of the basic stuff really, really well, like it always has. But then it adds this layer of carbon to it that's really critical, I think, for our practices going forward. Not many folks met the 70% cutoff last year, and I think that's okay. It's a very, very difficult bar to meet. And what we need to do is bring new tools to the fore, like electrification, on-site renewables, off-site renewables, and batteries. You know, how are we really addressing carbon with our designs? And it adds the ability to track that in addition to EY. So it's yes, and it also has a lot more complexity to it, which is scary. And we want to increase the users. We want to get people to report. So it needs to be simple and accessible, but it also needs to address like this bleeding edge if we're ever going to meet our % reduction goals.
I wouldn't say it's necessarily more like I'm not intimidated by the added features and things like that. I think it's well organized so that you can kind of like take in pieces as you're comfortable, setting up that first section, second section, and then when you're ready to get into your design data, you can start moving those toggles and adding that information in. So I think, I mean, at least in my experience, it's been pretty useful so far.
Well, Tate, I think in terms of, you know, where you start to get into granularity, the prior version versus now, you know, before you could get into a lot of detail about like what's all the various systems, sort of like really go down the rabbit hole, like, oh, we use this one specific kind of technology on the mechanical system. Whereas like here, now the sort of leveraging of granular data is around like these big conceptual moves of like electrification, of carbon intensity, and yeah, we're gonna be dedicating a session on carbon as part of the 2030 working group this year. So I think it's really great that, you know, it's not intimidating if you just sort of keep to the basics, and in fact, it's rather fairly intuitive. There's some improvements that could be made to make it even more intuitive as to what's required inputs, but it's approachable enough that those options that are you want to think about for a practice, that you aren't presented with that out of the gate. It's there, and you can go into it. So it sort of keeps at least one step removed, so that you're not put off by engaging with this. And to whether or not we meet the 70% or not, you know, I always think that this one understanding, as Lauren and Jonathan said, understanding first how you're doing within your own practice, and then determining, you know, where you need or where you can improve upon. And it's about that movement towards improvement, maybe more so than like, did I actually hit the 70%? It's more about the effort of trying to improve upon your practice and determining where you're sort of missing out on opportunities.
And that's where I feel like the data viz side of it is really critical. At least I feel like in my office, it's really helped me to understand how we can move forward, because no, we're not meeting the 70% reduction. And currently we're not meeting the 80% for this year, but we can see which projects have met that, and we can see which projects are well below that. And we can start to figure out what are the common denominators. Is it Is it energy modeling? Is it the kinds of renewable energy we're using on projects? Is it certain clients? Is what is driving those kinds of decisions going forward, I think can be really helpful.
And there was a case study from AIA National that we went through early last year, where the firm, and Bunny, you may remember the specific firm, but they, you know, had all these high performing projects, and they were focused on how can we improve those even more so to hit that goal. But when they looked at their whole practice, they found they have all these projects that are like way below the performance. And actually, if they took those projects and elevated them, they sort of improved the overall performance of the practice. And so, you know, it sort of flips to like, well, I'm focused on trying to like hit that goal, but you sort of miss the bigger picture of like, I can actually raise all projects within the office and have an even bigger impact overall, even if I'm only, say, taking the low performers and increasing them by like 10%.
And we've set one of our goals for the year is to energy model all of our projects, because I have looked at least one project that I worked on specifically where we didn't have an energy model, and I knew we were only meeting code minimum. So that's like 46% reduction for whatever code we were working with. But we were doing a zero energy ready homes project. So I knew that it had to be better than just the baseline. So just energy modeling your projects, it both improves your portfolio on, like, for the most part, and it also, you don't know what your goals should be if you don't know where you're at. So if you don't energy model, the number that you're going to get in the DDX is just going to be based on the code information you enter. So giving as much information as you can in energy modeling can really help you get more back from it in the long run.
To add to that, our breakout group looked at an example of an interior project, just to mix it up and to see some of the different variables for that one. And the thing that stands out immediately when you come to the target page is, or at least for the example that we were looking at, which was an education building, all of the projects in the DDX exceeded the goal. And so there are opportunities to do better than the 2030 target too. And that's consistent with, you know, what we talked about in our sessions last year when we looked specifically at lighting power density. But just to reiterate, you know, a lot of firms are finding a lot of success in setting a target that's a lot higher than 25% lower than the 2007 baseline. And a good starting point, which was recommended in our group, is just go for 50%. But the fact that the new DDX brings all of that data, it tells you how many projects are reported, what the median was, and what the high and low ends of that, of the LPDs for prior projects within your project type are, is just super helpful in making that argument too.
And the technology shift in lighting has changed dramatically from when the DDX and the 2030 commitment was started. You know, probably the best you could do back then was, a T5, fluorescent fixture. And the proliferation of LEDs, I have not had a project where I've had any difficulty overshooting the target goals, even if you weren't even trying on it. So, the 2030 commitment, sort of established the baseline at the very outset and didn't want to change that sort of baseline on folks going forward. So, the PEUI is based upon the CBEX information from the federal government, 2003, and the goal for lighting was established as a 25% reduction, and they haven't changed that on folks, but definitely the marketplace has shifted dramatically. And so I know many folks like HOK, they keep upping their target goals on the interior side of things year over year.
And I'll just ask a question in the chat. And I think we've talked about window to wall ratio being a really good test as one example. Was there anything else? I'm blanking on some of the other tips that we had. If you can't energy model the project, if you don't have the resources.
Well, there's in our discussion with Kim Shen last year with TLC, there was discussion about weighted averages, basically doing like a napkin sketch of like what's your wall surface area and U value types, and it sort of gets to the window to wall ratio piece as well. But when you start to think about where do you need to target your improvements on envelope, of thinking about how all that fits together in totality, even at just like a really coarse scale. So it's basically like doing a, U value times surface area for roof, walls, windows, etc.
And it's also a really good lead in to our upcoming sessions, which we're excited to announce and roll out. I know Apoorv and Janki are on the line too, and we've been working behind the scenes in response to a survey we sent out where we found that everyone, when asked what they could use more support on in terms of 2030, wanted to learn more about energy modeling. And so the next series of sessions are really looking at demystifying and breaking down the barriers to energy modeling. And that doesn't necessarily mean running a full building energy model, but preliminary studies that can be done in-house to do early phase design iteration that really bring in performance metrics and helping people get familiar with the tools that are out there at freeware that's available and then other services that you can use trials for or choose to adopt for your firm. Is there anything, Janki or Apoorv or David, that you want to add to that?
No, I think definitely looking forward for those sessions. I think that's a very valid question, I would say, especially for projects and firms where energy modeling is not feasible for all the projects. And I think looking at just the free information and the open source tools available at this point of time in the industry, I think those can be really helpful. But yeah, I think we should discuss those options as well.
And just to say, Apoorv is with AIA New York COAT chapter. So we're collaborating between Philadelphia and New York on this series of sessions going forward in 2021. So we're really just amped at like the possibility of taking this to a whole new level and bringing resources to practitioners to help us all get there.
And David, just to jump in, I know we all want to put 2020 in the rearview mirror, but if you go to our
we're in
Vimeo,
chapter 13 still though of 2020.
if you go to our is it Vimeo or Vimeo? I don't know how you say it.
Vimeo.
Vimeo. You go to our Vimeo page from last year. There were a series of really great sessions that we kind of picked up with as the pandemic set in, and we were going with Zoom, and we did the virtual presentations. But the Kim Shin presentation was a great start on demystifying energy modeling. There were some great presentations on tools, both sophisticated and less sophisticated tools. And then we did one just kind of going back to basics on, on shading devices and envelope considerations, and just kind of those basics that even if you're not modeling, these are rules of thumb that you can follow to do better, or even just kind of remind yourself of what better was when you were, so I think those things are all great uh, references to go back to. I know I found myself going back to them from last year.
Hey, I know it's 6 o'clock, but two big takeaways. One is, according to the 2030 commitment, only half of our projects are getting modeled. And this is true for projects that are over 100,000 square feet, which energy modeling pays up for in a matter of hours, let alone, weeks. So that there's a big opportunity there. I think we're missing out. And Purv, I'm so glad to see you on the call, as Elementa can provide like best in class support to do that. But if you don't have an energy model or budget for one, to rely on the AEDGs, the Advanced Energy Design Guidelines, and just look at the the 20 things they recommend, that's a really great start for helping targeting stuff for high performance. So thanks.
Thank you.
And AIA's building performance guide is really helpful as well. That chart from HOK and TLC about payback periods for energy modeling versus energy consumption. It makes it easier to have that conversation.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, every month, second Tuesday, 5:30 to 7, we're gonna.
Monday.
Sorry, Monday.
It's okay.
Oh God. Yeah, every Monday.
It feels like Tuesday already.
Yeah, it was. Well, it's because I was working yesterday, so yeah, it definitely feels like a Tuesday. Yeah, second Monday of the month, 5:30 to 7 Eastern Standard. We'll be here, pushing on the 2030 commitment. And to our new co-chairs, Lauren and Yankee. So thank you everyone for joining us tonight, and we look forward to a great year for this, building upon last year's series.
Great stuff.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.